Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell, and in today's video, we're going to look at employee termination. So, up to this point in the course, we've been looking at the role of the human resource manager to get the best out of employees, but now we're looking at the end of the employment relationship because termination is where the employee leaves the business, which effectively ends that employment relationship. Now, termination can either occur voluntarily, where the employee makes the decision to leave the business, or it can be involuntary, which is where it isn't the employee's choice and it's the business that's making the decision the employee needs to leave the business. Now, in some instances, the termination can be a really difficult time for the employee, particularly if it's involuntary termination. So it's really important that the business treats the employee fairly and lawfully, and it's normally the responsibility of the human resource manager to manage the process of termination. Now, there's four main methods of termination, and we're going to look at each one in this video. The first method of termination is retirement, which is where the employee decides to leave the business as well as the workforce overall. And that can be a really difficult decision for many employees because often work has been a really large part of their life. So the business can try and be as supportive as they possibly can during that time. Now, for each of these termination methods, we need to look at the possible entitlement and transition considerations. So, when we're referring to entitlements, we're looking at what the business is obligated to provide the employee during the termination. And for retirement, employees are entitled to any pay for the work that they've completed, as well as any accrued benefits such as annual leave or long service leave that they've accrued during that time. And during their actual work life, the business needs to pay compulsory superannuation payments. And that has been the case since the early 1990s when compulsory superannuation came into effect. And the idea is that then that can help support the employee financially during their retirement. And transition considerations are the elements that a business may provide the employee to help in the transition, but they are not legal obligations. And so for retirement, some considerations include things like enabling the employee to gradually transition into retirement by reducing their hours slowly over time, or offering counselling for those that are finding the change in their life quite challenging, or access to financial advice to help them in their retirement. And the business may offer the employee a farewell to provide an opportunity for their colleagues to say goodbye and also thank them for their service. The next form of termination is redundancy, and this is where the employee leaves the business because their job no longer exists. Now, there's lots of different reasons in which this could occur. For example, it could be that the business is looking to cut costs so that they need to reduce the amount of employees they have. Could be new technologies are coming in to replace some roles, and therefore there's no need for some of the employees within the business. Or the business may be simply restructuring their operations, which results in the need for some roles to simply disappear. And there's lots of other different reasons in which redundancy can occur. Now, redundancy can be voluntary or it can be involuntary. So, voluntary redundancy is where the employee nominates themselves to take up redundancy, whereas involuntary redundancy is where the employer is forced to leave the business because their job no longer exists. For example, let's say that a business is looking to cut costs by reducing the number of employees they have. Now, some examples of this in recent times has been Qantas, who have looked to remove 8,500 jobs, or even the tech companies like Meta and Amazon and Microsoft that have gone through significant redundancies in recent times. Now, we don't know exactly how they're planning on managing these redundancies. However, what they could do is to firstly offer voluntary redundancy, and that is where they would allow the employees to put their hand up to leave their job. In a business, there's likely some employees that are considering leaving the business for a whole range of reasons. And by firstly offering voluntary redundancy, the business is likely to attract those employees rather than forcing employees that actually wish to remain working at the business. Now, once the employees have taken up the redundancy, it's likely that there are still some employees that need to leave. So, with Meta, for example, of the 11,000 redundancies, maybe 1,500 or 2,000 took up the offer for voluntary redundancy, and the business would then look to involuntary redundancy to remove the remaining employees that are required to face redundancy. So, those that do remain in the business, it's the business then that decides on who will be made redundant and loses their role at the business. Now, with redundancy, The employees are entitled to pay for any work that they've completed, as well as any accrued benefits, such as annual leave and long service leave. They may also be entitled to a period of notice to allow them some time to prepare themselves for other employment opportunities. And depending on how long they've been at the business, they will likely also be entitled to a redundancy package, which is a financial payment that the employer receives for being made redundant. Now, this package is the same for both voluntary and involuntary redundancy, which is why for some employees, voluntary redundancy is a really attractive offer, because if they were considering leaving anyway, they now receive a payment for leaving by taking up redundancy. And to assist in the transition, the business can offer counselling, and that could be psychologists or even career counselling to help find other employment opportunities. The business may even engage Outplacement Services, which is an external organisation that helps manage the transition for the employee and also helps find other employment opportunities. So that's a cost to the business, but it can be beneficial for the employees that are being made redundant. And businesses can also offer extra time off to attend job interviews, or some may even provide training to help improve the employability of the employees in different industries. Our next method is resignation, which is where the employee makes the decision themselves to leave the business. And that could be for a whole range of reasons. Maybe the employee has a better job offer elsewhere, or they want to start their own business or go back and study. Or it could be that the employee is simply unhappy with their role or with the business. So it's important for the business to find out the reasons why the employee is leaving, because it could help them identify any issues that they've got that may need to improve to help retain quality employees. Now, during resignation, employees are entitled to pay for any work that they've completed, as well as any accrued benefits. As you can see, this has been a common theme throughout all these termination methods. And the business is actually entitled to a period of notice before the employee resigns. Now, how much notice that is, that's all stipulated in the employment contract. And to help manage the transition, the business can conduct an exit interview so that the employee has an opportunity to notify the business of why they're leaving and any areas they think that they should improve to help the other employees that are staying. And the business may also offer a farewell to the employee and may also provide a positive reference to help them in any future employment opportunities that they're looking at. And finally, we have dismissal, which is where the employee is terminated due to unacceptable behaviour or ongoing subpar performance. So essentially here, this is where the employer is fired. There are two main forms of dismissal. There's summary dismissal, where the employee commits a serious breach of their employment contract and therefore can be dismissed immediately without notice. And this is often due to a breach of the employment code of conduct. And then there is dismissal on notice. This is where the employee has done something wrong or their performance is not up to the required level, and they've been warned and provided an opportunity to improve. However, if things do not improve, then they may be given notice of their dismissal. And as with all methods, the employee is entitled to any accrued benefits and pay for the work that they've completed. Now, depending on how serious the dismissal has been, will determine what type of transition considerations, if any, a business may take. So, however, in some instances, the business may offer support to other employees, those that are still within the business, because it could be that they've been impacted in some way by the dismissal and therefore need support. And there's also the potential for the business to offer what's called career transition services to the dismissed employee. And that can help the employee find other employment opportunities. So again, that's bringing in an external organisation that helps manage the transition to help the employee, the dismissed employee, find another employment opportunity. Now, it's important for the human resource manager to be aware of unfair dismissal. So, unfair dismissal is when an employee is dismissed in a harsh, unjust, or unreasonable manner. And if that's the case, the employee is able to lodge a claim to the Fair Work Commission, which is the government body that oversees these types of matters. There would be a hearing at a tribunal where a decision will be made if the employee has been unfairly dismissed or not. And then the business may be ordered to pay a fine. So it's important that the human resource manager knows the law and they are trained in how to handle dismissals to try and avoid unfair dismissal claims. So just to recap, termination is where the employee leaves the business, and that can be voluntary or where the employee is deciding to leave the business, or involuntary where the business is making the decision that the employee needs to leave. So there's four main methods of termination, which are retirement, redundancy, resignation, and dismissal. And so that brings us to the end of this video. Can't wait to see you in the next video. But until then, just remember that for questions, activities, and help in your VCE journey, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.